I want to talk about White Lotus while I have a chance. I think it's the most fun show on TV right now. It's such a pleasure to get engulfed in the glitz and the glam of the resorts and the characters and just wrap yourself in the appealingness of literally everything that's on screen. Polymerize that together with perfectly cast actors and everything stays fresh from start to finish. It's a nice break from other shows where everyone is screaming all the time and making you feel like shit. The magic of White Lotus, though, is that when you take a step below the pure fun of all of it, you are in fact getting screamed at, and you do in fact feel like shit. That's why it's so good. You're having a blast watching it, and then all of a sudden it's 1 a.m. and you can't really drift to sleep, and all of a sudden I'm thinking of White Lotus and Mr. Stark, I don't really feel so good. What really pushes White Lotus to be something special and unique is how its characters present information to the viewer. In most shows, the narrative is story-driven first and foremost. Those shows revolve around what's happening and how it changes the world state. White Lotus flips this entirely. White Lotus revolves around the void of information. It's what the characters do not know or when they don't know what to feel that takes center stage. There's a brilliant YouTube video about how White Lotus uses perspective that you've probably already seen if you're watching this, but that video nails what makes White Lotus one of a kind. You're just a fly on the wall, where you're given a sliver of these hotel guests' lives and you need to make your judgments of these characters based on that. Mike White uses these informational holes to string you along perfectly. I want to use Rachel and Shane's relationship from season 1 as an example. I think we could all relate to the fact that Rachel meeting Shane at the airport is one of the most gutting scenes in the show. I wonder how many people would feel differently had we seen Shane and Rachel's relationship from the start. If you think I'm wrong, I want to raise that it's 2023 and people still defend Tony Soprano. We're given a snippet to work with, and it clears our vision and allows us to see how toxic Rachel and Shane's relationship is or has become. Because of the gaps in our perspective, it really allows us to get feet on the ground for investigating the cast. We're not omniscient, we're trying to piece everything together the same way the guests are. The show is deeply observational and pushes us farther away than any other prestige TV show. Within the White Lotus, information is hard to come by, even for the viewer. So following this train of thought, you wonder, in a show where information is the most important currency, who has the most of it? Allow me to introduce our girl, Daphne Sullivan. I don't think there's a character that gets as much done in these perspective shifts than Daphne, and it makes her one of the most fascinating characters I've ever watched on TV. In the White Lotus, the truth is way more valuable than money, for the guests at least. Daphne has an uncanny understanding of what's happening around her, and has a way clearer view of the truth than anyone else in the season. Yet despite all of this, I genuinely believe she comes out as one of, if not the biggest victim in all of White Lotus. Well, as far as the guests go. Well, as far as the living guests go. Alright gamers, it's time to take a voyage into the Daphne iceberg and see what we can uncover. Level 1. The Shallows. Now, on face value, the case is quite obvious. She has an asshole husband who cheats on her thinking his infidelities are secret when in reality they're pretty apparent to everyone but himself. Duh, she's a victim. But obviously that's not all that's going on. In fact, being cheated on doesn't really have much impact in the relationship because Daphne also cheats. In fact, her child may actually be from an affair with her trainer.
I have this trainer in the city, Lawrence. He's so handsome, he has blonde hair and these like big blue eyes.
This is just a picture of your kids.
So I think you could even make the argument that she's worse than Cameron. She's playing a game, and her friendly, breezy veneer is the mask she's using to hide the snake that she actually is, much like everyone else in the hotel. She's fake. Now from one perspective, yes, that is factual, but I think it's a very surface-level view of her character. It's prioritizing actions above all else and not looking deeper. It's a take I really dislike as it tries to spin Cameron into some sort of secret victim raising some child that doesn't belong to him, which I think is a gross misrepresentation of their characters and their relationship. Snorkels on, everyone. We dive deeper. Level 2 pivots. Sure, Daphne cheats, but she does what she needs to do to deal with Cameron's affairs. She may in fact be the secret chess master swinging the Najdorf opening while everyone else is playing checkers, but she's doing it for the betterment of her relationship. She's the one who secretly has the power in the relationship, and she uses it to make sure they stay happy and healthy. They clearly do love each other and have much more sexual chemistry than the normal audience-y Harper and Ethan, or any of the couples from season 1. Does it really matter how somebody finds happiness? Daphne is simply making lemonade out of her lemons. She's allowed to have her fun too, right?
I'm not a victim.
Sure, let's take her word for it. It's time to dive deeper. At this time, I suggest the tour offer appreciation to Megan Fahey's spectacular performance, because Daphne's words and Daphne's eyes tell two very different stories. Behind her sunny expression and unflappable energy, Daphne carries these quick glimpses of sadness and loneliness.
You're gonna go up to get some sunscreen anyway?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, grab it for him.
Oh yeah, I'll come up with you, Ashley, because I gotta change into it anyway.
Daphne cheats, yes, but it's only to create a system for herself to accept her husband and her marriage. I want to make it very clear, they do not have an open marriage. Daphne is aware of Cam's cheating, I don't really think he's aware of hers. She may be 2 steps ahead of him, but it's merely damage control for the relationship and herself. She's ahead of him, but she really has no control of him. She says she isn't a victim because she's fighting like hell to avoid being one. Her quotes of emasculation are posturing, so she doesn't have to feel bad about herself.
It's a warning to husbands, babe. Screw around and you'll end up buried in the garden.
She tries to dismiss Cam's behavior as human nature, not a flaw in their relationship. She's a masochist who gaslights herself into thinking she cheats for fun when in reality she's forced to out of reaction to her husband. She's trying to hang on to whatever independence she could possibly muster up. But what's the end result here? Her independence is still attached to her pig of a husband, and she has no friends so that her husband can't sleep with any of them. She's politically unaware, and she compromises her own sexual comfort in the name of revenge to a man that clearly doesn't care about cheating. She does all of this to cling onto this nuclear family image that she clearly covets. It sounds just like the 1950s housewife stereotype with a little zest. Let's go a little deeper. Keep everything I just said in mind, but I want to briefly pivot to some other guests at the hotel. I want to watch my favorite scene from the season, episode 5, a conversation at dinner between Dominic and Bert. Dom tries to tell Bert how his mother, Bert's wife, knew everything about Bert's affairs, and it made her bitter and hateful. Bert pushes back and insists that she never knew. For me at least, it's very easy to draw a comparison between this and Daphne and Cam's relationship. At the minimum, it's easy to draw a comparison between Bert and Cam. Daphne knows all about what Cam does, but instead of leaving him, she attempts to wrestle control back in a way that makes sense in her head. But when you step back from her made-up independence, she ends up looking a lot like the 1950s housewife, just with new and improved plans to take power back and doing what she has to do to not feel like a victim. Despite all of this, she's still left with the same sadness Bert's wife probably felt. It's not hard to imagine after doubling the length of their marriage, her worldview becomes a lot less easygoing and a lot more bitter and depressed. I don't think anyone could really believe that Daphne is a fully happy person. The saddest part is that while Daphne may be able to convince herself that she doesn't feel like a victim, she's still very much being victimized by her husband. She forces herself into these affairs not because she wants them, but because she needs to cope and feign independence during her deeply dependent life. What do you know, Mr. Stark? I don't feel so good. Let's hit the bottom of the sea with the f***ed up fish now. Daphne's willingness to live as a lonely housewife can be argued that it makes her character anti-feminist. She's willing to compromise with such dissonance from her feelings to uphold the nuclear family and white picket fence of sexist norms from the past. I mean, she intentionally chooses to watch Dateline instead of the news. And considering her reaction to Cameron Harper's political argument, I don't think she considers herself a feminist. I think it's pretty clear that Daphne's preferences and life goals fall very in line with classic patriarchal standards. That's why I think placing the blame of this at Daphne's feet is unfair. We have no way of knowing if those life goals are actually Daphne's dreams or if it's what she believes she wants because of those patriarchal standards. Is fitting into the patriarchy a choice made by Daphne in total isolation with full understanding of context? Of course not. Daphne has internalized sexist norms that force her into this toxic relationship, but these norms were not all created by Daphne, but rather the environment that she exists in. This is why she's such a fascinating character. Does she perpetuate her oppression by her willingness to stay with it? Sure. But she's also forced to live in a world where she's been taken advantage of by her husband and her environment at all times. It shouldn't be inherently anti-feminist to be a stay-at-home wife. Even though her goals align with the patriarchy, I think she's aware of the negative side of it and how it's affecting her. Again, she knows a lot more information than people think. She says she likes Dateline because she likes spousal murder, so picking that over the news may just be a coping mechanism as well. She chooses not to be friends with women because Cam will sleep with them. She ends up befriending Harper, and poof, it probably, allegedly, well, maybe happened again. So why does she willingly submit to the patriarchy? Well, 1, she drank the Kool-Aid for the nuclear family, and 2, I think she and Cam genuinely love each other, as crazy as it is to say. I see people say that she's staying with Cameron for the money, and while I think that's partially true, it is hard to leave someone when you're hooked on the lifestyle, but the two do share a genuine bond. Cameron's scene about Daphne's C-section is genuinely touching, and Daphne planned the whole Noto trip to go with Cameron, and when he isn't there, she's sad and thinking about him. The same way she's aware of how the patriarchy is weighing on her, she's also aware of the fact that it's enabling Cameron to cheat. She'd rather come up with this elaborate coping mechanism than confront him and try to change his nature and risk the relationship. She's a tragic figure because she'd rather close her eyes to what's happening and convince herself that she's in control than take back her actual agency in the relationship. She's willing to do all of this for the person she loves, even though he wouldn't do the same for her. Alright, Tor, it's time to surface. Enjoy this celebratory fish video.
There's always a bigger fish.
Anyway, this is why the plot of her and Cam versus Ethan and Harper is so riveting. Our original perspective is to side with Harper, the modern feminist, and be a little repulsed by Daphne's willingness to submit to the patriarchy. Yet as the season progresses and we see how bumpy Ethan and Harper are versus how surface-levelly smooth Cam and Daphne's relationship is, we kinda get tricked to buying into the lie that Daphne's feeding herself. Hell, I'd say that Ethan and Harper even buy into it by the end. Yet despite all this, we can still pick up on the sadness behind Daphne's eyes, to sober us up on the damage this is actually doing to her. Now, I'd like you to pick up on the sadness behind my eyes as I watch Tanya at the opera. A moment of silence, if you please, for our Madame Butterfly. If you like this video at all, maybe give it a like. If you really liked it, maybe even a subscribe. If you love what I said or hate what I said, please give it a share so I can get ratioed. Anyway, it's been a pleasure. This is Itchy Ankles, and I'm buzzing off.